Hey guys, Fernando doing our video for the Modern Survivalist. And a few days ago I talked with Daniel. He's a prepper in Venezuela. I've talked with him before, done interviews for my Spanish channel. He only speaks Spanish, so unfortunately I cannot have him in interviews for the English channel. But last time I did a follow-up video going through some of the more important lessons. So I'm going to be doing the same thing here. I got like 20 great tips from our hour and a half interview. Man, it is, it's what this channel is all about. My channel is about realistic survival and preparedness. Doesn't get a lot better than that in terms of someone that's been stuck in a regime, as he calls it, which it is. A socialist regime that has been going on more than he could ever hope, ever thought it would last in his wildest dreams. One of the things that surprised me was in the first interview I did with him that he planned for a worst case scenario and he bought a year and a half worth of food. He thought that the socialist regime would not last more than that. 20 years later almost, he's still stuck there. And one of the other lessons we got from that was sometimes when you wait too much, it's just too late to make that change. So let's get to it. It's going to be 20 points. The first one is I asked him about the situation with coronavirus, what's happening over there. Of course, it's a country where there's no freedom of press. No one really knows what's going on, but the virus is most definitely spreading. As we've seen in some of those, I think it was in Ecuador, where they said like they have like 100 dead, but you have dead people in the streets, paving the streets. So the official story does not match what people see. And one of the obvious points that Daniel was making is people live like day by day. People barely scratch enough to make a living each day. When you cannot go out because of the virus, then just it destroys the ability of people to earn a living. In a country like Venezuela, that's even worse than in our places. Number two, he was yet again talking about power going down, like they only have like 6 hours of power a day where he lives, so it goes down every single day. So you have to make up for those hours with something else. But the sporadic availability of energy, of power, that's a big thing. It's a common topic in many of the things we talk about, and we just take it for granted. But he's been living like this for years, so it's not the end of the world like many people fantasize about, in which there's no power anymore. It's like, and I love talking with him because it just reminds me of so many of the points I've always tried to make and get people to understand. It's this gray area of, no, it's not the end of the world like people fantasize about, but then again, you don't have power like you and I have. He just has 6 hours a day, and he has to organize his life around those hours of availability of power, charging stuff, seeing what he can get done in terms of using his computer. So his life revolves around that. Number three, strongly linked to this point about power availability. Some of the older, he has an older fridge, which he finds easier to repair and even has better isolation. It's thicker, it's bigger, it's more old school technology than some of the newer ones, and it's more resistant to these surges of power. It's easier to fix, and when power goes down, it just has thicker isolation and it just holds on better to whatever coal he manages to get. I thought it was interesting because sometimes we want to always have the latest, best thing. Sometimes some of the older stuff, if you have an older fridge and you're thinking about throwing it away, maybe keep it around. Maybe there's a good point there. Number four, he was talking about keeping, and this is something I did myself back in the day. He talks about having your fridge with bottles of water frozen, so it's a bottle of ice basically, and when power goes out, you just move it from the freezer to the fridge, and you use it like an old school ice box. Back in the day, it used to be that a guy, the Iceman, would go around the neighborhood dropping big blocks of ice, and you would put that in your ice box, and that's how you kept stuff cool. So you're basically doing something like that. And even when he said, yes, with that you can get your food, it's going to be holding on up to 3 days. That's exactly my experience as well. Up to 3 days with warm weather, that's the maximum you can get out of using your old school ice box. What I did was use some of the drawers for fruit and vegetables or meat or whatever it is in the fridge, and use that as a fridge within the fridge. So those drawers, I would put a couple of those bottles, put whatever it is that I'm trying to keep cool between those, and cover it with plastic, tarp, or something like that, so as to improve isolation as much as possible. Doing that 2-3 days, 3 days tops, is realistic. Number 5, he was talking about how the regime has eliminated armed private security. So they used to have armed private security, since the state has pretty much failed across the board. People relied on private security, and those private guards would have firearms. They disarmed those guards as well, so as to have the complete control of any armed group beyond themselves. And private security is just kind of useless right now. All they can do is just pick up the phone and call the cops that likely will not come around anytime soon to be of any help. Number 6, he was talking about how heavy money gets, and this is Weimar Republic type of discussion. He was telling me that so as to buy a pound of chicken, you need 5 pounds of paper currency money. 5 pounds of money so as to buy 1 pound of chicken. Think about how crazy that is. The paper itself is worth more than the bill that it's printed. It just blew my mind. Still in that topic, number 7, one of the things the regime is doing so as to handle this is trying to eliminate cash. So you don't see those images, Weimar Republic style images of big piles of cash so as to buy, a can of tuna, because it's how bad the inflation is. So the only amount of money you're able in cash, the only amount of cash you're able to get out of the bank is enough to buy a coffee. A cup of coffee. That's all the money you're allowed to get out of the bank. The rest you have to use it on plastic, on debit. This is key so as to understand the importance of cash. When you go towards a cashless society, you're going towards a lack of freedom society. Cash is freedom. A government that wants to get rid of cash is extremely suspicious, and they don't have the best intent for people. You want to have cash. You don't want to move towards a cashless society, because that's what countries like Venezuela end up doing. Number 8, when talking about cash and such, I talked about precious metal, gold, silver and such, because I know that it's extremely valuable, of course, even in Venezuela. What he was saying, very interesting, that because the market is kind of cornered by the mining company, that it belongs to the state, it's hard to get a good price. I mean, gold is extremely valuable. He told me that one of the first things, and I saw this in Argentina, one of the first things that people did when the country started going downhill was sell their wedding bands. The little bit of gold that they had, they sold it so as to buy food. They would sell the family's TV or dishwasher or fridge. Anything that was valuable in the household, they would sell it to buy food. That's how desperate people became. And gold is definitely valuable, and it's a good idea, but he was telling me that you usually get like 30% below spot price. So it's 30% below the market value of the actual precious metal. That is still a ton of money for people in Venezuela, but you're not going to be getting a fair deal, which is, it's something to keep in mind as well. But gold, silver, definitely very valuable. Probably stuff like Bitcoin, like cryptocurrency, is an even better idea. Number 9, that there's this this happens in Argentina as well. Man, so many similarities. There's a dual exchange rate for currency. So the official exchange rate for any money, let's suppose you're a very resourceful person in Venezuela and you're getting money sent from abroad because you earn money from out of the country by some means, like working online. The government gives you an exchange rate that it's 20% less than the real one. So they're ripping you off, they're putting you like an added tax or something on the money you're getting from abroad, 20%, in spite of the horrible conditions that you have. So yeah, and that happens for him specifically. That Daniel was telling me that he has to deal with that, with the conversion rate, that it's below, far away from any realistic numbers. And then PayPal, who is also getting a big cut out of his share, is also taking into account in that number. Number 10, houses that want to be safe, houses. We were talking about home security, and he was telling me that people that have money, their houses look like basically like a brick wall. It's going to be surrounded by a very tall, solid wall. You don't have houses with nice, with nice front and all of that. Anything fancy is eliminated. You just want to have like whatever house you have, it's being kept behind a solid, tall wall. You want to make your house look as strong, as hard as a hard target as possible. And you have that wall, and then you have a fence, and then you have an electric fence, and then you have barbed wire. So basically you're working on several layers, because crime, it is, I think it's the murder capital of the world, Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. Crime is definitely a huge problem, and we talked a lot about that. Still in the topic of security, number 10, 11, so we just talked about number 10. Number 11, internet goes down as well. So power goes down, internet is also pretty bad. Cell phone communications, very sporadic, very unreliable. All of this affects many of the home security systems that people have. So it used to be that those little cameras that many of us have inside your house as to check things out with motion detectors, that is not working anymore as a viable home security system, because it's not reliable, the access to internet or cell phone communications. So that's one more thing you have to keep in mind in your plans. Number 11, what I have 11 here again. Okay, that doesn't sound right, but let's go with number 11 again. So it's a double bonus. Batteries, expensive. Batteries are expensive. They cost quite a bit of money. This is something he brought up very often during our conversation. Alarms are great, but those wireless alarms that use batteries, no, those are not so good, because you have to replace the batteries, and batteries are expensive here. So batteries was something that was in his mind, obviously, constantly, all the time. Number 12, no gasoline, which is ridiculous, because Venezuela is one of the largest has some of the largest reserves of gasoline, of oil in the entire planet. Now they managed to screw even that as well. What ended up happening is that they just took over and ripped off and got rid of any private company. The only company working was a Russian one. The only working refinery was a Russian one, and even that one left. Now the government that used to run things, they used to have a refinery, they just abandoned that and just left the Russian company doing this, because they were focusing more on the drug trade. Venezuela is one of the largest drug cartels in the world. The government is in charge of the drug business in Venezuela. So when the Russians left, they had to try to reopen those refineries that they pretty much abandoned, because they just didn't bother them with that. So when they tried to reopen those refineries, the only thing they managed to do is to blow it up, because they are useless. They don't know how to do anything. So the regime managed to even screw up gasoline availability in Venezuela, and gasoline is very hard, if not impossible, to get as of, I believe, as of this very moment. Number 13. Forming groups of friends, preppers, like-minded people. This is something we were talking about in terms of trading stuff. I have something useful. I have a flashlight. You have a pen. Okay, let's trade. I need this. I have a walkie-talkie, something like this, and I need these. Okay, let's see what is it that we can trade. Trade it's definitely something that happens when, especially in more unstable economies. It's not maybe the epitome of commerce after the end of the world that a lot of people want to think it is, but it is definitely something that can become very handy. He was mentioning how valuable cans of fresh, well, not fresh, but cans of, like peaches or anything in terms of like a bar of chocolate. All of these were in very high demand. So one of the things that you have in Venezuela, that people that do have food usually have bland, basic staples. So maybe they will have rice, maybe they will have pasta, maybe they will have a little bit of flour, but nothing more, stuff like a can of tuna or a can of peaches or pineapple. Anything like that is a luxury. Chocolate, ketchup, he was mentioning, ketchup, butter, those things, good cheese, or even cheese at all. These things are a little bit more complex, kind of a luxury over there. Number 15. So we're back to our 20 list. Illumination. This is something that he brought up often, all the time. We were talking about the batteries. We were talking about lights going out all the time. And one of the things he's kind of obsessed with is lighting. He wants to have light in his house, which we take it for granted, but in his case, it is a little bit of a luxury. So he goes through like some of these LED light bulbs that burn out and die, and we just throw them away. No, Daniel, he just picks those up and he starts tinkering with them, see how he can make those LEDs function again and connect them to a battery. He uses his actual car battery for illumination, and then when he has power again, he charges it again. So his batteries, even your car battery, is a very valuable piece of equipment. So stuff like golf cart batteries or lifter batteries, anything like some better quality battery is definitely in high demand and is quite valuable. 16. In terms of home security, having locks custom made, tougher locks to pick, that is also something that he was bringing up. If not, the more simple, typical locks, those are easily picked, not providing much security at all. He mentioned many times of improvised security gadgets that he ends up improvising himself. For example, he improvised some security measures in his car, hitting locks and hitting switches that people didn't know about, so someone trying to steal it would not find it. And many of these things he came up with himself. He's a guy that he used to work in security, so he kind of has a good mind for that. So that's what he ended up doing. Number 17, kidnappings. Random kidnappings, express kidnappings. This again typical of Argentina as well. They just pick someone up because of the school uniform, a kid, or they just kidnap something because they learn that you just bought a new TV. And they kidnap you for a TV, or they kidnap you because they know you have guns. They kidnap you for anything of value that you may have. They just kidnap a family member and ask for that in exchange. That has been going on for a very long time. Venezuela being the socialist paradise that it is, crime just goes, unpunished and it's not persecuted and not followed, and just crime is basically rampant across the entire country. And there's no punishment for criminals. Criminals are basically the ones running the country, so kind of makes sense. Talking about this, we ended up talking point 18, talking about awareness, and he was insisting a lot on how awareness is a huge thing, how with good awareness you can avoid like 90% of the potential crimes that you would end up being a victim of. If you're aware, if you see things happening and you just move away from potential threats, criminals also, and this I agree with him many times, if criminals see you that you're seeing, they just go look for someone that's more distracted, someone that's a softer target. That is very typical, and I agree with him a lot on that as well. Number 19, in terms of firearms and training. This is maybe one of the things where we just disagree a little bit. He's more of the idea of not having a gun because he's seen firsthand how people that had guns, some of his friends, have been targeted specifically for the gun. Now, I'm more of the idea of, okay, in that kind of situation, you want to keep it, hush hush. You just don't mention that you have a gun. But he's seen people killed over their guns. And he's also seen people die because they just didn't know how to use their guns properly, and that this goes straight. I'm certain about this. Goes straight to lack of proper training. He mentioned a specific situation where a friend of his, he kind of went for a gun, but he touched it, but didn't actually draw it, and he got shot while doing that. He was just kind of like bluffing, and he would bring out his gun. That's the kind of thing that you do when you're not properly trained. If you are in a dangerous situation, he even mentioned like shooting in the air or scaring people with your gun. That's the kind of thing that when you have a good training, you just don't do. I mean, if you draw your gun, you draw it and you bring it so as to use your gun, and only if the threat has ceased from the moment you do that do you not shoot. So this idea of just pretending you're going to be drawing a gun, no, that no one serious trains people to use a firearm like that. You draw your gun. You don't always shoot it, because some people will, again, people that have no freaking idea of what they're talking about. If I draw my gun, I'm going to be shooting. What? You draw your gun and the guy turns away and starts running, you're going to be shooting him in the back of the head, going to jail over that? No. But you draw your gun, you control the situation, and if you don't have to shoot, you don't shoot. But your gun is properly drawn. You just don't pretend you're going to be doing it, right? Because that's the kind of thing that gets you killed in a place like Venezuela. But just little differences in terms of this goes back to proper firearms training, and this is my tip. This is my little addition based on what he's saying. I think it's crucial based on what he sees that you actually have good, solid firearms training. Not all firearms training is good. There's some pretty crappy out there. So get yourself a good, qualified instructor. Doesn't matter if he's the meanest, baddest motherfucker on the planet. Just needs to be a good instructor, someone that teaches you properly the way in which you would be using a firearm in a violent confrontation. Doesn't matter what a specific person has done in his life, in his past, what his service may be or whatever. If he's not a good instructor, if he's not teaching you the right tools to use in those kind of situations, then who cares? I mean, good for him, but it's not going to be doing you any favors. This is the kind of thing where a good instructor makes the difference between living or dying. And finally, point 20 would be that he's mentioning always multiple attackers. It's very rare that you only have one. It's usually, we were talking about, I knew a guy that got into a shooting in Venezuela, someone that was very well trained. He trained in Argentina, where with the instructor I was taking classes with at the time, and the guy was a very good shooter. He was a great shot, actually. The kind of guy that just, you hand him a random gun, he picks it up and he goes boom, 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 like this, like Deadeye from that crappy movie. Well, he shot like that for real. He was like duck, 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 one after the other, just ripping up a big hole. And he was caught in going out of a bank. He was taking cash for someone, for his employer. And as soon as he was out of the bank, he just had a gun in his face. And he just went for it. Even with a gun pointed at his face, he said that he was being pointed like this, like gangster style. And he just went, and he started shooting. He shot the guy. The guy shot him in the leg because of the angle he was pointing the gun like. And he just turned around and found the accomplice and shot him in the back a couple of times. Long story short, he bribed the cop that arrived to the scene and got out of it, plus his connections for the people he was working at, likely people that have contacts with the government itself. But it's a kind of messy situation you really want to avoid. But at the end of the day, you want to have means so as to defend yourself. And I understand what Daniel is saying in terms of keeping it shut. Just don't share that you have a firearm, because it is valuable and it can make you a target. Guys, if you like my take on survival and preparedness, I suggest my books. A lot of this stuff I cover in Street Survival Skills, which I keep on recommending, and for economic collapse crises, my first book, The Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse. But these are resources, a lot of this based on this stuff that I was talking with Daniel, very similar experiences in Argentina and Venezuela, which just reinforces many of the things that that I already knew or even went through as well, but it just puts things in another light to see yet another person have many of those same experiences. See you on our next video, folks. Have an awesome day.